Okay. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Resilience Movement podcast. I'm your host, Donna Moulds, and I am super excited today. I invited Carroll to the Resilience Movement podcast because resilience, in my view, isn't about coping, it's about capacity. And very few people understand capacity under pressure the way Carroll does. So his career has been spent working with individuals and leaders where psychological readiness, identity, and emotional regulation directly impact outcomes. And for audience navigation, leadership, responsibility, life transition, his insights offer grounded, practical wisdom and not just theory. So, Dr. Carroll Greene is a retired US Air Force colonel, triple board certified psychologist, and one of the earliest architects of operational psychology within the US Special Operations. So, over his career spanning more than 4 decades, Carroll has worked at the highest levels of military performance, selection, and leadership readiness. So prior to semi-retirement, Carroll served as a director of psychological applications at the US Marine Specials Operation Command Training Center, where he led psychological assessments, selection, and training programs of Marine raiders, roles carrying training investments of up to $800,000 per individual, which is amazing, a great investment into people. And his work across the US Special Operations Command included combat and intelligence operations support, clinical leadership, and consultation to senior commanders on complex human performance challenges. So, as the first psychologist assigned to the Air Force Special Operations Command and later a multiple joint Special Operations Command units, Carroll helped shape the foundations of operational and behavioral health practices still used today. His career bridges elite military operations, leadership psychology, and resilience science, offering rare insight into what truly takes to perform, lead, sustain effectiveness under pressure. So I want to welcome Carroll to the podcast. So welcome.
Thank you, Donna. That was a very kind introduction. And I'll try to live up to some of it. I might remember some things from all that.
Fantastic. And so I feel very privileged because one of the things that we need is people who have a wealth of knowledge and lived experience. So thank you for joining us here. And I like to ask some questions, but if there's anything you think you can add as we go along, please, feel free to do so, because I just think that you will be able to share some amazing things with our listeners. Is there anything that you would like to share with our listeners before we dive into the questions, Carroll?
I don't think so. I think about the questions and I love the way that you've put your thoughts together, and I'm looking forward to hearing the way you phrase them as we talk. And I'm just appreciative of the opportunity.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. All right. Well, let's dive into the first one, which you've spent decades working with individuals operating in, environments where failure is not an option. How do you define resilience when performance carries real operational consequences?
Well, when I think about the question of resilience, I think it's to me the definition is fairly simple. I see it as recovering from some kind of adverse event or circumstance, and returning to optimal performance. So resilience is sort of like a recovery process, and so I think if you recover from anything now. Here's my model. My model is human beings function from mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual foundational pillars. All four of those pillars have to operate, or you're sitting on a three-legged stool. And that never works very well. So you'll hear me refer to that framework, as I answer questions like this. So I think those are the most important things. Those are the four things that I would pay the most attention to. And of course, we know when we say failure is not an option, that doesn't mean it won't happen. It just means we don't think of it as an option as we go into dealing with something that's highly stressful or extremely important, or may involve life and death circumstances. But I think those are the four pillars that are most important. And if you have those things together in your life, if you have a lifestyle that pays attention to all these things, you'll be a lot more resilient and able to recover from any kind of adverse circumstance, whether it is physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual.
Fantastic. Thank you. And it's interesting when you say like failure is not an option. I try to use that phrase when I'm doing big things in my life, certainly not in the Air Force, but when I was trekking, failure was not an option. So I like that. And the three-legged stool theory, I have heard that before, and I think that's a really good theory to think about. So you were deeply involved in selection and assessment for elite special operations. So this is a two-part question. So what psychological qualities consistently predict long-term effectiveness, not getting through the selection, but sustaining performance? And also what traits look impressive on paper, but break down under real life pressure?
Yeah. That's a great question. It's one that every leader I've ever worked with wants to know. And there are good ways to go about looking at that for any particular occupation. Some like work studies that look at the elements contributing to work. This is a general answer, but I can tell you that within the world of high stress, actually physical operations that involve some danger, some pressure, and that's just not in the military. That can involve industrial applications. It involves law enforcement. It could be any situation. It could be medicine. Medicine is a life and death business where people deal with that every day. So the standards and the requirements are not too different among all of those high stress occupations where the standards have to be very tight and very precise, and where people have to conform to them on a regular basis, no matter how tired they are, no matter how many demands they have on them in the moment. But I would say just to hit the characteristics that seem to work really well in those environments. One, people have to be able to tolerate ambiguity. There are, you take those of us, and I include myself, who like to have control. We like to be able to predict our environments. We get our biggest trouble in relationships is that we try to control too much. We try to make things happen, solve problems, when what we need to be doing is really being patient, being quiet, simply asking questions, and allowing for things to unfold enough that we have enough information to actually make decent decisions and not jump to conclusions. So tolerating ambiguity can be extremely difficult for those of us who like to be in control of our environments. And yet it's one of the most important things within a lot of those fields that I just mentioned, because the circumstances of whatever situation you're in could change moment to moment. So whatever plan you have made about how you want to handle that, it may not predict at all exactly what it is that happens when you're in that situation. So that tolerance for ambiguity. The other thing is intelligence. It's one of the things that we've tested for among elite performers, whether this is in business or whether it's in the military, law enforcement, really doesn't matter. But people have to be intelligent. And by that, what I mean is they have to be practically intelligent. Normally speaking, they don't have to have a whole lot of book knowledge. Maybe in medicine, they probably have a lot more of that requirement than in many other fields. But they do have to have a lot of knowledge about something. So they have to be intelligent. What we found out in selection over time is we're talking about high pressure, if you're talking about life and death circumstances, you also have to be able to know when to not get paralyzed by your analysis. They used to call it the paralysis of analysis, where somebody who is very bright, capable of looking at lots of elements about a particular situation, may be looking at the elements beyond the time when they should have made a decision and gone ahead and taken action. And so one of the things that selection has always encompassed, both in the military as well as in high-level positions for business anyway, corporate levels, at executive levels, is work simulations, where you put people who are tested, we know they're very intelligent, but you put them in a work situation where they might feel the demands and the pressures of the normal work environment, and then see how they perform. Are they able to make decisions? How can they do with an in-basket exercise where you have so many minutes to decide which baskets these particular kinds of challenges you go into. That's a simple one, but there are all kinds of versions of that. Sometimes there are physical challenges that you have to look at a situation, see what elements and resources you have to deal with it, and then make a decision within a very short period of time about which way you want to go. So intelligence is very important because it can inform you about all the variables involved, but it can also cause you to stay lingering too long over analyzing which is the best approach. And so intelligence is a gift. It's very important, but it can also get in your way. So you have to be an action-oriented individual also.
Actually, can I just jump in there for a second?
Sure.
Because as you were talking then, I was thinking, so is it the longer that someone takes to make the decision, the harder the decision becomes because they're putting too many variables in there?
Good way to think about it. Yep. They may be thinking about it, too many variables, or the person may be very bright. They may be thinking about all the right variables, but they're not aggressive enough. They don't have an internal sense of aggressiveness that says, I don't have to have all the answers. I just need an 80% solution. Let's go with it. And sometimes people are reticent to do that. They're unwilling to assume risk. You don't want them assuming too much risk, but they've got to assume some. We all assume risk. Every time I get out of the house to drive to work in my car, I'm assuming risk. There is no certainty that I will ever arrive at work. I'm evaluating probabilities and making a risk-aware decision.
Yeah, perfect. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No
Keep
problem.
going.
Sure. Another thing is personality. One of the fears that leaders have sometimes about getting psychologists involved in selection for important positions is that when we talk about personality, that we're going to think, oh, well, you have to be a nice person, or if the psychologist doesn't like your personality, they're going to give you a thumbs down on this decision or something like that. Which is, if these are good psychologists, you're not going to get that. What you're going to see is people who are looking for personality characteristics that match a scientifically done work analysis that says what are the characteristics that are needed. But one of the things I can tell you that we've found, this for lots of senior leadership positions, as well as for anybody who has to work on a team or run a team, is that introverts tend to do a little bit better than extroverts. This is particularly true with younger leaders who are in their 20s or perhaps their 30s. Introverts are people who simply like to think about what comes out of their mouth before it comes out of their mouth. And so it gives them a little bit of a chance to evaluate the situation, listen to others, and think before they speak. Extroverts, not a bad thing. Neither one is bad. They simply function better in certain situations. Extroverts, on the other hand, we learn to trust them very quickly because you tend to get to know them because whatever they're thinking tends to come out of their mouth. So you trust them pretty quickly, whereas introverts are trusted less quickly in a team environment because it takes longer to get to know what is really going on in their heads. So, but I would say most leadership positions in high stress areas are better handled by people who are a little bit more on the introverted side, but who have very good social skills. They're good listeners. They are aware enough that they don't know everything, so the humility is involved too. That tolerance of ambiguity, intelligence, humility, a little bit of introversion are usually a very good set of characteristics to start with, and then kind of train from there for specific situations.
Right. Fantastic. Wow. And it's funny as I'm thinking about those things, because I'm more of an extrovert, and it's so true. You do. I tend to overshare, and that doesn't always work in my favor.
I have undershared most of my life and have had to learn to share more.
Right. So let me ask you then, in high performance environments, identity often becomes fused with the role and the mission. What happens psychologically when the role changes or ends or is removed?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think my experience anyway, has been mostly with people who are really devoted to an occupation. And in my business, that was special operations and career military leaders in general, who have found success in their work environment. They have found a sense of purpose over time. Whether they had it when they started or not is another question. Sometimes it takes a while to develop it. And a lot of people
Mm.
reach midlife somewhere between 35 and 50 years of age before they begin to realize, wow, these are the kind of things I've done in the first half of my life. And these are the things I really enjoyed. These are the things I didn't do so well at. I'm beginning to realize now that I've got a set of gifts for this particular thing, and I believe in this. And so their sense of purpose becomes clearer to them. But I
Mm.
think one of the most important things is to have a sense of purpose. And when a person has found that in a career, and for military members, that often means staying for 20 years in a position that you're in, and then retiring for a lot of them is around age 45. So then the question is, okay, what do I go do with the next half of my life, where I'm going to be able to find some kind of sense of emotional and mental and spiritual engagement with the team I'm working with, as well as in the mission or the product or whatever it is that we're in this business world trying to produce. And I've
Mm.
seen many military leaders and operators who have said, "Wow, I got out. I went to work for so and so. I thought this is what I wanted to do, but I missed that sense of camaraderie. I miss the teamwork. I miss feeling like I'm a part of the team. And I miss a little bit of the challenge, the danger, the fear that we had to deal with in that process." Now, there are plenty of other businesses besides the military where you can find fear and you can find danger, you can find challenge, but they have to be able to find it. And a lot of times a counselor can help them
Mm.
realize that it just involves a change in your thoughts, because all of our behaviors start with self-talk. And that would probably take a lot of backup. We could talk about that for hours, but all of our behaviors start with self-talk. So if I'm an individual who's unhappy with this career change that I've made, part of that unhappiness can be what I'm telling myself and how I'm thinking about this change. So
Mm.
if I tend to focus in on whatever uncomfortable aspects I have to deal with in making this change, or if I'm impatient in terms of adapting to this new environment, this new challenge, I may find myself telling myself, wow, this is the wrong place. This is not as good as where I used to be. I must be in the wrong place, and I should have been, a part of this team by now. So if our expectations are off, if our past experiences have clouded our present judgment, a lot of times just talking with somebody can help you understand, well, no, Carroll, you expect to be a part of this team. It takes 3 years to integrate with these kind of teams. Or you haven't thought about, what are y'all doing downrange? Here's the product you're creating, but what does that do for the world when that product reaches a vendor and becomes part of someone's life?
Mm.
So at that point, some people go, oh, well, I hadn't thought about it that way. I just knew that I didn't like running this particular machine. So sometimes just getting your thinking straight about, number one, how fast should you be feeling like pro again now with your new career. And it can really help to know, too, that the people around you appreciate what you're bringing to the fight. In the military, one of the things, or working with any teams really, in law enforcement or in medicine, is how team members value each other. And
Mm.
after a while, you're a part of a team, and you just know, you innately feel valued. You innately know that you handed the physician a piece of equipment that saved a life, that they relied on you. They didn't even look. They held their hand out. You put it. They knew it was going to be the right thing, because
Yeah.
that's the feeling of being a part of a team member, or being a part of
Mm.
a team for a member. So helping people develop realistic expectations of what their second career might be, or what their new purpose might be, and then supporting them as they go through the process of adapting. Because just because I understand it cognitively doesn't mean my heart is going to be tolerant of all the, and has as patient as it needs to be.
And it's interesting, as you're saying this. So, in my last corporate role, I came across an organization called Veterans in Construction, and
Mhm.
it actually was founded because the organization helps veterans find purpose again and gets them into construction, where all of their skills that they had learned in the forces, that whether it be the Army or the Air Force or the other emergency services as well, I think, they then help them find jobs that give meaning and purpose back. Because I really do understand what you're saying about having that purpose, and that makes all the difference. And interestingly enough, they got some of the veterans into a construction job that was on the War Memorial in Canberra. And I went, oh my gosh, could you, that would be just the ultimate job, right? To work on the War Memorial that gave you like just, yeah, it really, really warmed my heart to see an organization doing such amazing work with these guys who felt like they had lost everything, lost their purpose. They might have had injury, whether it be psychological injury or physical injury, but they were to help them, reassess how they could actually transfer their skills. So that was awesome.
That's great.
Yeah. So let me ask you then, because you answered my next question in what you were talking about. Let me go to emotional regulation under extreme demand. So in combat, intelligence and special access environments, emotional regulation is critical. So what skills genuinely, differentiate those who remain effective under pressure from those who don't?
Yeah, I'm wrestling with the word skills. There certainly are skills involved, but I think the most important thing is what I would call conditioning. If you think about all of us really as mental, emotional, physical, and spiritually grounded people, that doesn't mean everybody is. Some people are not grounded at all in two or three of those foundational elements, and it always shows, and it always ends up being a part of what can contribute to performance deficits. But in terms of differentiating those who remain effective, I would say they're the ones who have all those four foundational elements at least pulled together in some way. And I balk at the word skills because it sounds cognitive. It sounds like if I know how to do this, and I don't think you mean it that way, but once I've developed the skill as well as the experience of applying it, and that's a mental and a physical thing. It's also, if you're talking about high stress, it's an emotional thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I like the word that you changed that to is conditioning. I really do.
Yeah.
And I think that's I think it sits much better than my word of skills. So thank you. And sorry, continue.
Sorry, I was going to say skill is certainly involved. Okay. Diaphragmatic breathing is a skill, and it's extremely helpful under pressure. Reframing my self-talk is extremely helpful under pressure, but it's going to be under real stress. It's going to be totally ineffective. I'm not even going to be able to do it very well unless I have conditioned through practice under stress, under pressure, my ability to do that, because we know that physiologically, when the stress goes up, and it could be stress due to anything, time demands, it could be a lethal threat, it could be just I'm extremely cold, or it's extremely hot, or I'm in the mud, or I don't know what's going to happen. So whatever the stress is, once it begins to go up, the question is, how solid will my skills that I have developed stay? Okay. So what we know is that if you have developed those skills under the similar stresses, if you were in the mud, under pressure, underwater, barely surviving, your cortisol, your epinephrine, your norepinephrine were extremely high, your adrenaline was really running, and you were able to do this new skill even under that kind of pressure, and then you did it again 10, 15, 20 times, then when you're under stress in the real world and you're out on an operational task, the old heads would always say, just relax. Under pressure, your training will take over. And it does. But it's more than just a skill. It's a combination of skills, conditioning, reduction. One of the things we know from survival training, which in the US, it's called SEER training, survival, evasion, resistance, and escape training. There's been a lot of research that shows that when people have gone through high stress training, the kind that really can demoralize you if you're not a relatively resilient kind of individual, and cause you to question your own capabilities and your own ability to survive and your own ability to lead under pressure. When you've gone through that kind of training more than once, your body actually secretes less cortisol, less adrenaline when you're under similar pressures. So there's a real physiological conditioning factor that goes into physiological change that comes about because of mental, emotional, and spiritual issues. And when I say spiritual here, I should clarify and say I'm not talking necessarily about religion. It could be that your spirituality has evolved from a religious connection that you've had throughout your life. It could be that that's where you decided these are my values. You've adopted the stories of that religion, regardless of what it is, and you these are the justifications why your values are the way they are. But you've adopted them. So people who are very solid in their values and have strong faith in their values, that can come from religion. It could also come. A lot of our special operators would drop by my office and some day and just ask me, "Hey Doc, what do you think of this this guy who has a podcast? He's a blogger," and I go listen to him, and they come back, and we'd have discussions over his approach to life and his thinking about how you lead and his thinking about how you raise kids and what are the important values in our country. So people who are studying what their values are going to be, trying to learn how am I going to father my children, how do I need to build my relationship with my wife so it can get us through hard times and stresses. People who are looking to develop their values and grow in values ways, those are spiritual people. So whenever I asked one of our operators, I would say, "Would you have a spiritual life?" during an initial interview, and they would say, "Do you mean, do I go to church?" I would say, "No, I don't mean that at all. I mean, do you have a time where most every day you sit down and think about what are the values that guide my decisions? What are the things I'm going to do today at work? How will I treat people? How will I treat my job? How will I get myself engaged so that it can produce a superior product, a superior performance?" Because if you don't do that, then you don't have a central purpose that you've developed in your life, and you're not developing values around that purpose. So a lot of times you're going to lack motivation. I've seen 200 young men or women show up for a very stressful orientation and selection operation for special operations of some kind. Of course, when they give the first physical test, probably 60% of them are going to get sent home, because if you don't prepare for the physical part that is going to come, then that's the easy one. You can't do 60 push-ups. Okay, sayonara. But if you can get through that, then there are other stressful challenges that we're going to put you through. So we're out of 200, we may end up with 35 or 40 left at the end of 3 weeks. Because it's not that the ones who left don't have the capability to pass the physical demands. They may have the capability, they may have the stability. By stability, what I mean is that capability stays stable under pressure, the kind of pressures I talked about: physical discomfort, mud, rain, cold, heat, things like that. So if you can't run as fast at those times, then or be as strong or as effective or as caring or supportive to your teammates, you're not going to be able to do what you need to do under stress. So there's capability. Can you do it? 2, does it stay stable under stress? But thirdly, the most important one is motivation. What about you personally says, this is me. This is what I am about. This is why I am put on this earth, carry out this purpose. So feeling that individual singular sense of purpose that connects you. And I've seen so many special operations selections where very capable, very stable, excellent, smart young men went, okay, you know what I've realized after 2 weeks is that I can do this. And a lot of them, that's why they came. They just wanted to know I could pass the test. I'm in fact a tough guy, or I am strong. And so they found that out. And now, so they know it stays stable under stress. But they say, but I don't think this is what I want to do. I don't think I want to be away from my family this much. I don't think I want to have these kind of demands, because in those positions, it's not a job. It's not something you do for 3 years and then you get out and you go do something else. For most of the ones who stay, it's at least more than 2 or 3 times signing up. And for lots of them, it is a career of 20 years or more.
Yeah.
So
There's a couple of
capability,
things.
stability, and motivation.
Yeah, that which is fantastic. There's a couple of things that come up for me as you were saying that. And when you talked about who will I help today? What will I be? There's a thing about who will asking yourself the question, who am I going to be today? How am I going to serve? They're questions people want to ask themselves because they have that awareness that they have a choice. But there are many people walking through the world that don't think they have a choice and think that the external events that are happening to them are what makes them oh, I couldn't help anyone today because I had a bad day because someone cut me off in traffic. That's really interesting to me. The second thing that came up for me was when you're talking about that resilience and can you do something, and a lot of the people who are going through that training want to know that they can do it, to I guess be that challenge. And it's interesting because when I was trekking Kokoda back in 2012, I was only one female in amongst 11 men who were doing it because the other girls that apparently had booked didn't come. So they actually rang me and said, we want you to know that unfortunately you're going to be the only female in the group. And they wanted me to make that decision, which I did. And I'll tell you a funny thought. The only thing I thought about at that moment was, I'm going to be the only girl peeing in the bush. That was the first thing that came to my mind. But more importantly, when we were walking up one particular section, which was very early on in the trek, I was walking up this hill and mentally I had formulated these things in my mind. If it was tough, I like drink some cement, suck it up, princess, all of these sayings, right? None of them were working. And I reflected back on something, and it was walking to the beach with my grandmother. And I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, and we had beautiful walks to the beach. And I said, right, I'm just walking with grandma. And I spoke to her. She had passed away. I spoke to her and said, we're just going for a walk. And I'm crying because I'm physically exhausted. We're walking up a hill for 3 hours. And all these men are looking, oh my God, she's crying. And they're starting. I said, and I stopped them and I said, listen, I'm a girl, I cry, I'm emotional, but I'm fine. And kept walking. And I was just having that conversation with my grandmother. We're just going for a walk. We're just going for a walk. And I got to the top and then they gave me some lolly snakes to build my sugar back up. And I was good, right? But it was that mindset. It was that resilience that I had to really dig deep into and explain to someone else, don't be worried about me. I'm fine. This is just how I cope.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it was,
I would say, go ahead.
oh, I was just saying it was important for me to be able to do what I needed to do emotionally and then be okay with it.
Absolutely. I'm a person who I like to kind of reduce things to their simplest level. And as I listened to you tell that story, I thought, what you were doing? You were doing a lot of different things with imagery and remembrances and that kind of thing, but you were changing your self-talk. The self-talk that at one point was telling you, I don't know if I can do this. I'm not sure I can go on any longer. I'm so tired. Can I put another foot in front of the other one? And instead of continuing that line of self-talk and ruminating about failure and about your weakness, you went back to another time. What that did was that changed the self-talk. You were no longer saying those kind of things in your head. You were now telling yourself and remembering more comfortable feelings, feelings of satisfaction, feelings of success, possibly being motivated by the kind of person your grandmother was. And just you had to clarify because I have seen so many people, men and women, cry when they feel helpless. People who love to have control, when they are in a situation where they, no kidding, are in fact helpless and are being treated badly, which when you train people for captivity, then that's one of the things you expect them to have to deal with. There's crying. I had it explained to me one time that the tears that come from fear and helplessness are different chemically. They're actually different chemically than the tears that come with happy feelings or feelings of joy. So they're chemically, your body is doing what it needs to do with toxins in order for you to stay healthy and mobilized. So it's
Wow.
just a good way to think about that.
Wow, wow. That's incredible. I am so loving this conversation, Carol. I am just so loving this conversation. So um and I think you have kind of just touched on this next question, but can emotional regulation and psychological control be deliberately trained, or are we largely dealing with innate capacity? And I think you've answered that, but is there anything else you want to add to that?
Sure. I would say, yeah, innate capacity is really good. That's kind of what we look for in selection and assessment programs. Among the young people who do apply for the military and then are successful in the military in general, and who then apply further to meet higher standards, to be pressed harder, to have more stress. Um, I think they will learn to be even more disciplined. They will learn now, I would say, disciplined under certain
Mm.
circumstances. A young man who is at work in uniform or out of uniform, but at work surrounded by teammates, may operate or act a little differently, maybe a little bit more constrained, a little bit more concerned about his leadership presence, a little bit more concerned about, can my teammates trust me?
Mhm.
Then if he goes out for a beer in the evening with a couple of guys even from the team, he may be different. Okay. So but I think certainly you can train, and this is back to the term conditioning. You can train yourself to operate in a certain way under a set of certain circumstances, or
Mm.
if I'm in a certain kind of setting, I'm going to act this way. Okay. It's like for me, I'm an introvert. So if I go to a cocktail party or a big social gathering where I don't know a lot of people, um, I know how to do two things. I've got social skills. I can walk up and introduce myself, start a conversation, and using open end questions and paraphrasing, I can get people to talk to me about what they do and learn about them.
Mm.
Or I know how to do this too. It doesn't come natural. I can share stuff about me. Now, if you've been around very many people, that um, a lot of times people don't want to hear stuff about you. They want to talk to you about them.
Yeah.
And so I know how to let them do that. But that's not something I do all the time. I'm not doing it now. Okay. I am just trying to be me and think off the cuff and respond with what's in my head. Okay. But in certain other situations, I wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
So this is the important thing. It's about conditioning and conditioning to certain sets of circumstances, as opposed to having innate ability. But if you've got that innate um, introversion, intelligence, and motivation. Once again, it comes back to capability, stability, and motivation. If you've got all three of those, then we can condition you to do lots of things under certain circumstances.
Mm.
Does that make
Wow.
sense?
Yeah, 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 it does. Okay. So now let's jump over a little bit to leadership, responsibility, and culture. So, from your experience advising commanders and senior leaders, what psychological responsibility do leaders have for the environment they create?
A tremendous responsibility. This makes me think about LinkedIn and a variety of the other social platforms that I read from sort of regularly. And it's even leaked into the popular news every now and then about the fact that people don't leave jobs because of the job all the time. They very often leave because of lousy leadership. So it's a lot about how in lousy leadership requires many, many definitions. If I'm 20 years old, my idea of lousy leadership is going to be different than my idea at my age. So it depends on how you define that. But I would say where people don't feel valued or they feel disrespected, I wrote down a couple of things.
Mhm.
Um, Another thing too is leaders, at least in the settings I work, where there's very high stress. and where there's potentially danger sometime, and certainly danger to your career, if nothing else, the way you're perceived and whether people perceive you as a good team member, sometimes even as a good shot, a good runner, as being strong and somebody able to carry your role on the team. If they don't perceive you that way, then that carries over to the leadership. So leaders who appear fearful, working with people in those kind of environments, if you appear fearful, if you appear to be worried about what your boss thinks about what you're doing, more worried about that than you are whether the people who work for you understand why you do what you're doing and feel valued by you, that's a bad problem right there. If people, one, don't feel as valued as you don't value them as much as you value your boss's opinion of you. And when that begins to come out, you will lose the support of a team very quickly. You won't know it. They simply will not support you. And under life-threatening conditions, it can end up to be a real problem. Another thing is isolation. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just taking myself back to, I worked in a men's maximum security prison, and the leader we had in there, our governor of the prison, was a remarkable leader. Like, he was just, he allowed you to make mistakes. He allowed you to, have such autonomy in your role. And of course, you then in turn respected that and communicated back to him and so forth. And he just has left such an imprint on my life. It was incredible. And then I've moved to another corporate role where I had completely the opposite. And that leads me into the next part of that question, which is, what are the most common leadership behaviors that unintentionally erode trust, resilience in the effectiveness over time? You were going to share something else with me. Please do that first, and then if you can just expand on that.
What I was going to do is kind of related to that. I was talking about fear, and if the leader's fear comes out that they're more afraid of their boss's opinion than they are of doing something that has a negative effect on their employees, that's a big problem. Another thing is introversion. If the boss tends to stay in their office more and doesn't manage by walking around, that can be a problem, because people will assume two things. If you're in your office all the time and you're not out engaging with the people who work for you, they'll figure that, number one, they're not important to you. Because, in any kind of organization of any size, usually a leader has a team of a couple of people who control critical resources or have critical, information. And that leadership team tends to make most of the decisions. And then perception on the rest of the workforce is that, and out of that small team of important people come demands from me to do that just make my life hectic and give me more work to do on Monday morning. So it conveys an impression that I am not one of the important people. And sadly, that ends up being the bulk of the organization. If you're more of an introverted leader and you stay somewhat isolated in your office or only work with a certain small team of people. I've had the opportunity to work with and coach lots of senior leaders on how do you get past that? How do you, if you are basically introverted, first off, go ahead and do it in the morning when your energy is up. Go out and engage people. Get into those back shops where your presence is not even hardly known, and go in there and sit down and say, hey, I haven't been in here very much, so I don't know many of you guys. So what's your name? You married? So get to know people a little bit. And then on your way out the door, just say, I don't know why I don't come down here. You guys are critical. You're always taking care of this. This is why I don't come down here. I guess I don't have to. This shop just runs so smoothly, and you got such great leaders in here. I don't need to come. So, but I'm going to try to. I feel bad about that. So I'm going to try to get back. Thank you, guys. I appreciate your time. Gone. So to be able to move around, let people know what they're respected for, and not blowing smoke, but making a sincere effort to think about what's the role this person or these people play in our success. How do I see that so that I can explain that to them in a way that they would never know if I didn't do that? So letting people feel respected and valued is so important. Then, if you got to be introverted, for the rest of the day, go back and hang out in your office and work on your computer or do what you need to do.
Yeah.
But make that a regular practice as much as you can. The
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
thing, yeah, the other thing is to be open, to be self-disclosing, not to the point of telling everybody your personal problems, because nobody wants that, but to the point of saying, I saw a leader take charge of an organization, a very large organization of about 10,000 people. And at his speech at the change of leadership, he said, he made some introductory remarks. He thanked the previous leader and for all the work they'd done, the organization, what a stellar organization it was. And then he said, and today I am really sad. And he just let that ring for a moment. And he said, the reason I'm sad is because I've worked in organizations this size for a pretty good while now. And I realize that I am not going to get to know in the short time I'm here. I'm not going to get to know every single one of you who come to work every day, motivated, ready to engage, and you do a wonderful job. And I would love to see that. And I will get to see some of you. I will get around, I get to know you, and I will rely on you. But that's why I'm extremely sad. I'm extremely excited, however, because because regardless of that, I get to work with people who are motivated like you, who are strong, who are capable, who are committed, and who, regardless of how long you've been in this organization, you are here because it's in your heart, it's what you want to do, and you're engaged every day. And you can never know how much I appreciate that. And then he moved on to some other topics. This is an effort for a leader to self-disclose their passion, their connection to the people, and their appreciation and respect for the organization. I think it can be said in 100 different ways, but that's just one example.
Yeah, yeah, which makes people feel more valued. So I've got time for one more question for you, and then I'll ask you to share something else. But you've worked with people who exposed to and sustained high operational stress. What distinguishes resilience from endurance, and where do leaders go wrong?
Yeah, I don't have an overall concept on where leaders go wrong. So I guess I would have to ask you to tell me a story, give me a name, and we'll figure out where that leader went wrong. But I see them as different concepts. As like I said earlier, I think that I see resilience as the ability to recover to optimal functioning quickly after a failure, an injury. It could be any one of the four pillars: mental, emotional, physical, or spiritual. It could be a loss of hope. It could be the loss of a comrade or a teammate, and that could be spiritual and emotional. It could be a failure to understand the stock market and what you thought it was predicting for right now. So you lost some value when you thought you were going to gain. So that was more of a mental, although it has an emotional consequences. It could be an injury, like you mentioned way earlier. It could be a young person who is successful working their way to the Olympics, but then has a serious injury. What I've seen with that so many times is it has emotional consequences. Somebody who's so accustomed to being in control, particularly in control of their own body, who no longer can do that. And it's all of a sudden, and all of the worry and the fear and the pain too that goes with that. It's not uncommon for athletes in particular to go into a depression at a time like that, and to be unreasonable in terms of how long they think it's going to take to recover, whether they will ever recover. That's that change of career. Well, what will I ever find that means that much to me, that gives me a sense of purpose again? How will I ever find that? So I think that would be resilience, that ability to recover, achieve optimal functioning again after a big setback. Whereas endurance, I think of as more of a function of, are all those four areas balanced? Do you have a mental life that is active, is focused on things that are important to you? Do you have a spiritual life in which you're doing a regular job of growing yourself personally to become the kind of leader, the kind of husband, the kind of father, the kind of son or daughter that you want to be? So a personal focus that, for me, every day, my wife and I sit down every morning, and we have a couple of readings that we go through, and then we have a program that's called the Daniel Plan. It comes out of a church in California that we look at 5 aspects of our lives and say, how did I do in this area yesterday? What's my plan for today? Where do I want to go with this? So I think doing those things is very important, and can help you restore yourself in terms of resilience. But it's even more important with endurance, because if you are doing those 4 things, you will have your energy where it needs to be. There are 2 books that I wanted to mention before we stop, but one is called Resilience at Work by Salvatore Maddi and Deborah Kashaba. His name is Maddi. It's a very short read. It's an older book. I think it probably came out in just after after 2000 or somewhere along in there. But it does a really nice job of explaining simply 3 things that are involved in resilience. 3 easy ones. Control. You learn how to focus on what you can control and not waste energy thinking about what you can't. Okay. So what you did when you were climbing with that group of men, you said, I'm not going to focus on what I can't control anymore, which is whether I'm tired or I'm dusty or I feel like I'm exhausted. By the way, special operators have a saying. They say, once you hit the point where you feel like you can't go on anymore, you know you're at 40% of your capacity. You have another 60% left.
Wow.
All it takes is that kind of belief. Like you're saying, all those sayings we have about when the going gets tough, the tough get going. It is what it is. Yeah. The Marines had a saying that embrace the suck.
I've heard that from Brene Brown.
Yeah, all of those are sayings designed to get us out of this mindset of focusing on what we can't control and focus on what we can control. And then commitment, control, commitment, and challenge. Commitment is simply that idea that whatever I'm facing in life deserves my full engagement. It deserves my full effort to get into it, beyond it, and past it. And then challenge is just the whole idea of welcoming challenge. Life is, our American actor, John Wayne, many, many years ago, is quoted as having, I don't know if he did or not, but he's quoted as having said, life is tough, but it's tougher if you're stupid. So I think, and it's not stupidity, but it can be a bad habit of focusing on the negative and not knowing how to shift into something that you can control versus things you can't. The other thing that Maddi and Kashaba mentioned is transformational coping. What that simply means is that when a change is going about, you're being laid off at your job. You're being dropped from some selection program that you were really wanting. It was the focus of your life. Do you have the ability to, after a short period of just kind of wallowing in despair, to be able to say, okay, it's time to move on. What is my next vision? I can have another vision for my life. This is not the end of my vision. It's the end of one vision. I have the ability to create a new vision every day if I want it. So transformational coping is that ability to establish a new vision, to build that within yourself, and even share it with others when it's necessary, particularly if you're a leader and you're leading a group of people during change. That's extremely important, to be able to cast that new vision and let people know how they are a part of that vision. And sometimes that involves helping them develop or getting them to help you develop the vision.
Yeah, fantastic. And the second book?
Go ahead.
What's the second book?
The second book is, let me see, I had it right up here, by Lair and Schwartz, and it's called The Power of Full Engagement.
The Power of
by
Full
Jim
Engagement.
Lair, and the first author's name is Loehr. I think it's pronounced Lair.
Yeah, I'll put both of those in the notes in the podcast. So thank you, because I love books. So I'll take a look at both of those. So I have one more question, which is just closing insight. So if there is one thing people misunderstand about resilience, especially high performers, what would you want to correct?
I don't know if there is one misunderstanding, but I would say there's probably one misunderstanding about military high performers, and that is that they're just all aggressive. that they're not very bright, and that they're just bullish about the way they approach life, and they don't mind fighting. And, and that is not true at all. It's fact, it's far from the truth.
Mm.
But people make those assumptions just like we do about anything that we don't really understand, we've never been a part of. And we think, wow, what would I have to be to get me to do what they do? That's where that logic comes from. Well, because they aren't like you, they don't require what it would take to get you to do that. So I always like to say there's tremendous diversity among elite performers, including Olympic athletes. But there's a lot of characteristics that they have in common too. Self-discipline is certainly one. We've talked about a bunch of them. The ability to deal with resilience here, the ability to deal with failure and adversity, in the case of athletes, injury and pain, but to have that central sense of purpose that can push you beyond all that. You see, this is peripheral stuff that I'm dealing with in order to pursue this central purpose that I have with young people who are that level of performance. They have adopted that image of themselves, that vision that drives them. They adopted that very early in life, much earlier than lots of us seem to get it, because it can come in as late as middle age, I guess, around 50, 60 years old sometimes, before people start to have a sense of purpose.
Yeah, fantastic. So I could talk to you for hours. I literally could talk to you for hours. I thank you so much.
I'll be here. That's fine.
I thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, what you've shared with our listeners, and I look forward to doing this again sometime in the future. So one thing I would like to ask you to leave with our listeners is what would you say is a piece of wisdom for listeners who are going through adversity and building resilience? What's one thing you could say to them?
Give me the first part of that question again. You broke up a tiny bit.
Oh, sorry. So what's one thing you would say to our listeners about resilience that that for those who are going through a difficult time, what's one thing you would say to them?
Okay. One, it's a difficult time. It is not permanent. All of our difficulties are times. And two, the way you think about it has everything to do with, one, how long you'll wrestle with the discomfort and the pain. And the important thing to do is think about, let's go back to Maddie and Kashaba's principles. Control. Focus on what you can control. Don't focus if you've lost a job. Don't focus on the job that's lost. Focus on where do you want to go now. When you're in your thoughts, when you think about the job you lost, think about it not as something you really wanted that you lost. No, you just got a valuable piece of information. You don't belong in that organization. That organization did not respect you. They did not see your gifts. They didn't see you as critical to their operation. And so, celebrate the fact that you now no longer have to deal with people who don't respect you or don't appreciate what you bring to the fight. And then start your transformational thought, your coping, and thinking about, where might I go? What did I see in this place that says I didn't belong there? What did I do or not do that people wanted from me? And then where might I use those things? Because they're not bad. It's not bad about me. It's just me. Where can I apply those things where people do appreciate those things? So those are just some initial thoughts.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Carroll. And I look forward to sharing where this has gone around the world. And we will talk again.
Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure.